The Arezzo family. 900 years of history. It's an incredible and fascinating story. A story replete with knights, conquests, nobility, rebellions, accomplishments, intrigue, heroism, and even tragedy. A story that is inextricably intertwined with that of Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, in which, because of its strategic importance, was invaded, ruled, and influenced by a score of foreign cultures. And through those 900 years of political and cultural upheaval, the Arezzo family not only survived, but thrived. This video will attempt to tell you a little bit about that Arezzo story and how those of us with Arezzo blood are connected to it all. I hope you enjoy. Perhaps before we start, I should introduce myself and tell you what motivated me to put together this video. My name is Joe Albanese, and while I don't carry the Arezzo name, I am proud to be one of the 14 cousins, as we call ourselves, the children of the 8 siblings that traveled to America from Ragusa in the 1920s with their father, Giuseppe Arezzo, to continue the legacy of the Arezzo family here in this country. That's my mother, Maria, youngest of the siblings, born in Ragusa in 1920. She made the trip over to America as a 6-year-old. She would have been 100 years old this year, as would my father, Giuseppe Albanese, or Joe as he was more commonly known, who was also born in 1920. Their centennial anniversary made me realize how little I knew of their lives. They both unfortunately died at early ages. My mother was 69 years old when she passed, and my father was only 60. That was 40 years ago. It pains me to say that I'm having a hard time remembering them. Sure, I have brief flashes of images from the past that pop into my head, but as time marches on, they are less frequent and less in focus. My own advancing years and brushes with mortality have stirred an interest in the past and a thirst to know more about their early lives. Fortunately, my brother Bernard, or Bern as he is more commonly known, has done a good amount of work researching their lives and gathering documents as well as those of our ancestors. I'm sure many of you watching this have been invited by Bern to the genealogical website genie.com, and that was the first place I started exploring our family tree. It didn't take long until I found myself totally engrossed in the history of the Arezzo family, and that of Sicily, which served as such a spectacular backdrop. The more I explored, the more I knew I wanted to document some of that history and to be able to pass it on to future generations so that we never forget the past that has brought us here and what we are connected to. Before we go back 900 years, let's look at the more recent past. Exactly 100 years ago, 1920. What was going on in the world, and especially in Sicily, where Giuseppe Arezzo and his wife Agata Maria Francesca Vincenza lived in this house in Ragusa with their 8 children. 1920, that was the year the last sibling was born. As I told you previously, my mother Maria was born in August of that year. The oldest child, Constantina, or Aunt Connie as I knew her, would have been 12. Next in line was Rosalia, who would have been 10 years old. Next up was Ignazia, or Ina, who would have been 8 years old. Then we have our first male, Giorgio, who would have been 6, followed by Salvatore, 4 years old, Federico, 2, Carmelo would have been a 1-year-old. And then there's my mom, Maria, who was born in August of 1920. You can see there was also another child, Giorgio, born in August of 1909 and died 8 months later in April of 1910. So their ages in 1920 would have been 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1, and a newborn. Now that's spacing your kids out with precision. Now Sicily after World War I, and much like Europe, was suffering tremendously economically with hyperinflation, wiping out life savings, unemployment, and widespread poverty. Politically, Mussolini and the fascists were on the rise, gaining power, and the mafia was widespread in Sicily and at its very strongest during this period, squeezing rich and poor alike. Meanwhile, in the United States, things couldn't have been more different. Prosperity was on the rise, social change was in the air, America was coming into its own as a great power. It seemed like the beginning of something, not the end of something, as it must have felt like in Sicily. So in 1923, when tragedy struck the Arezzo household, with the unexpected and sudden death of Agatha, it's not hard to understand why Giuseppe made the decision to take his family to America and plant the Arezzo name on this side of the Atlantic. We know Giuseppe had made at least one trip to America alone in 1921. Whether that was related to his import business or whether he was contemplating moving to America at that time, we can only speculate. He did have a brother, Federico, that had emigrated to America in 1914 and was living in Brooklyn. By the way, Federico was one of 10 brothers and sisters of Giuseppe. As you can see, the first Giuseppe died in his first year. Another sibling died at age 3, one at 17, another at 20. Unfortunately, Giuseppe was no stranger to tragedy. In July of 1925, Giuseppe took his 4 oldest children, Connie, Leah, Ina, and George, and boarded the SS Duilio out of Naples, bound for New York City. Giuseppe and his children entered the United States under his treaty trader status. A treaty trader visa was someone who was coming to the United States to engage in substantial trade in services and/or technology. Giuseppe was engaged in the food import business and must have qualified under those criteria. Neither he nor the children had visitor visas, and that becomes important a little later in the story. Giuseppe brought the 4 youngest children, Sal, Fred, Carl, and Maria, to America 2 years later, in April of 1927. The 1930 census indicates that the entire Arezzo family lived at 2127 83rd Street in Brooklyn. And here we see on the 1930 census Beatrice Arezzo. That's BG as we used to call her. Giuseppe married Beatrice Gallo on May 28, 1928. Perhaps these 2 fuzzy photos of some of the siblings were taken at that address. Here is a better photo when they were a little older. And when I look at this photo, I try to think what it was like for them, what their lives were like. Well, we can get a little hint by looking at some newsletters that we have of the Junior League of the Society of the Children of Ragusa, which was a social organization founded by Giuseppe in 1934 and which grew to over 400 members. The younger members of the club formed a junior league, which included the Arezzo siblings, and they put out a monthly newsletter called The Rag, a play on the slang word for a newspaper and the fact that they were from Ragusa. The Arezzo siblings were very active members of the junior league, and there are frequent references to them, usually in a good-natured ribbing sort of way, which to be one of the main staples of the newsletters. Here you can see both Connie and my mother Mary being mentioned. Connie, who was the oldest sibling, would have been 29 years old at the time, and my mother 17. Just think about that for a moment. 8 brothers and sisters spanning a decade in age, all hanging out together in the same social group, watching out for each other, taking care of each other. I couldn't imagine that happening in modern times, and I think it tells you a little bit about what kind of people they were. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of articles. This one talks about Giuseppe, as I said, who founded the club, and it was interesting to read how others saw him. The article starts off with the abbreviation CAVUF, which stands for Cavaliere Ufficiale, which is an honorific bestowed on someone from the state, kind of like being knighted in England. I don't know if Giuseppe was actually bestowed this honor or the writer of the article was just using it as a sign of respect. But in any case, the article goes on to discuss the achievements of the organization and attributes it to, as he says, one man, Giuseppe Arezzo, a man whose energy, merits, and aims we have learned to know through his unimpeachable sense of justice, a man whose earnest efforts have been the nucleus of our success, and whose prowess is the reason for our progress. Hence, we shall stand united in mind, united in body, around the one man we can trust with the reins of our society. Obviously a fan. Another article caught my attention was written by Leah, and it shows her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. It's titled, What the Junior League Needs. Some of her entries are more self-control during the meetings, less self-control after the meetings. More young men with the ability to enjoy themselves without the aid of liquid stimulation. Less members who insist on suggesting a trip to Coney Island for a custard while dancing is going on. More girls who are not afraid to show their intelligence. Leah was a liberated woman before anyone knew what that term meant. She was no one's fool. But Leah also had a romantic side as well. Her poem, The Kiss, in the same issue, amply shows that side of her. The kiss. What is the kiss? The kiss is a rosy apostrophe put between the words Ti amo. A communion of two souls, the prelude to love, the preface of the idyll. A means of making a heart tremble, the savoring of two souls on the lips. Something sweeter than the morning dew. An instant of infinity that has the rustle of a bee among the plants. The dream of a Ragusan. The kiss is everything. Leah and Connie lived together their entire lives and were totally devoted to each other. Oh, one last thing. The Sons of Ragusa social club that Giuseppe founded in 1935 still exists today. 85 years later, still helping new immigrants from Sicily adjust to their new home. Its current location is on 18th Street in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And this article that you're looking at is actually a translation from an Italian website highlighting notable Ragusans. Pretty remarkable. My brother Byrne, in digging up all the available documents he could find relating to our family, came across this arrest warrant for my mother. It was dated February 8th, 1944. Now, I never thought of my mother as gangster, so this kind of got my attention. And it was in order to arrest my mother and hold her for a hearing to determine if she should be deported. As I had mentioned earlier, Giuseppe and his family had entered the United States under his status as a treaty trader. In other words, in order to conduct trade business here in this country. When he died in 1941 and his import business dissolved, her legal standing to remain in the United States ended as well. She had her hearing in April of 1944. And the hearing showed that she worked as a typist and clerk and earned $29 a week, and that she and her three sisters pooled their assets, and that they now had $1,304 on deposit, $425 in war bonds, and furniture and personal effects worth about $2,500. The hearing found her of good character and of having 4 brothers serving in the armed services at the time. They ruled that she could voluntarily leave the United States rather than being deported back to Sicily. And that's what happened. She left the United States for Canada and re-entered legally and eventually applied and received her naturalization certificate. I assume that Connie, Leah, and Ina had to go through a similar process. I try to put myself in my mother's shoes. Her mother is taken away from her when she was only 3 years old. Her father, who was such a dominant figure in her life, at 21. And then at age 24, every male that she knows and loves is overseas in a great world war that would eventually take the lives of over 400,000 Americans. Her 4 brothers, her brother-in-law, her fiancé's brother, were all risking their lives for our nation. And she was facing being deported to a country ravished by war at which she has little memory. I can't imagine how she must have felt. Fortunately, all the Arezzos, Albaneses, and Camilleris survived the war, and when they came home, they started their own families, but they always remained very close. Here they are on a cruise together in 1976. Ina with her husband Joe Camilleri, George and Pearl, Sal and his wife Adeline, Fred and Rose, and Carl and Sally. Collectively, they had 15 children, 14 of which survive today. They also have 27 grandchildren and at least 23 great-grandchildren at last count. As a kid, one of the days that I most looked forward to was New Year's Eve. This was the day that the entire Arezzo clan got together to celebrate the incoming new year, and it was a tradition from the very beginning, as you can see from these photos. I'm going to shut up now and just let you enjoy these great photos from past New Year's Eve parties. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? You know, I started this video lamenting the fact that my memories of my parents were fading away, but just the process of making this video has refreshed some of those memories for me, and I hope for others as well. And for those of you that didn't know the siblings, I hope you get a sense of how very special they were. I also hope I did justice to their memories by telling you a little bit about their lives. Now in part 2, we're going to be going back to Sicily to take a look at some of our more distant relatives. I hope you will join me. Thanks for watching.